My microphone still isn't fixed yet, so I'm just getting a little stir crazy in the pulpit, so this will have to do for now. I owe the new Deacon Andrew, an apology. The first homily that I gave when he was here, of all the things I could have talked about, the first thing I mentioned was that he was a gambler. So he's recovering from a non-life-threatening surgery, so if you're watching this live, I'm sorry, Deacon Andrew. One thing that I should say about Andrew that I love so much, he's a good friend of mine, is that he is so enthusiastic about many things, but especially about his faith, the faith. And when he came here the first couple of weeks, I saw that enthusiasm again with new eyes, and it made me enthusiastic. It made me want to try harder as a priest, but also as a follower of Christ. He gave me that conviction back, gave me a chance to start anew. And that's, my brothers and sisters, is something that God wants to give us. God wants us to start anew our faith, our relationship with Him. St. Paul was that enthusiastic disciple of Christ who went out to the Corinthians and he saw that they were kind of languishing. They didn't have that same conviction that they had in the very beginning. And so he comes back to them. That's why it's the second letter, because he realizes even after the first letter, they've kind of stopped trying. And so he comes back to them and he mentions that the love of Christ compels me to live no longer for myself. And Paul, this is St. Paul, who he was whipped 40 lashes, 5 different times, shipwrecked, stoned almost to death. And yet he still continues with that enthusiasm. And why? Because the love of Christ compelled him to do so. He had encountered God and realized how much he was loved, which allowed him to go through all of that over and over again, all the troubles, all the hardships, which he accounts in this letter. And I highly suggest that you take the time to read it, especially chapters 4 and 5. But he goes through, I've gone through all of these things, yet I continue the conviction to live no longer for myself because of the love of Christ. And that same conviction that we can get from an encounter with Jesus is available to us because God wants to have that as well. And so I want to talk to you about lukewarmness. What does God hate the most? Often we would think people who go against him, who persecute him and his church. But no, in the book of Revelation, Jesus says that what angers him the most is people who are lukewarm in the faith. He says that they're no good but to be chewed up and spit out. Pretty dramatic, huh? But we all get lukewarm, not just in our faith, but in our commitment to being a good father and mother and sister and brother, to be a good coworker, to working in our field, to working at school. Whatever it may be, we can get lukewarm. Our conviction can kind of drop. But what God's trying to tell us through St. Paul is we have an opportunity to be lifted back up again, to be reconvicted, if only we give God the time to allow him to convict us, to remind us how much he loves us. Yes, when we see a crucifix, we should be reminded it's not just a general love of God. No, that's a love of God for me in particular, because when I didn't even deserve to have happiness, to have life, he gave it to me anyway. And he wants to be able to reconvict you in prayer when you're on your own, you have the time to listen, but not just to love him, but to love the neighbor, to live no longer for yourself. And what does that mean? That means if you are a parent and you've been working hard at work, and you come home, and you have the children to take care of, and you're really feeling like, oh man, I really should just take care of myself first. No, it's that love of Christ that sees, he loved me first, not himself. It reconvicts you to be a good parent. For me, it reconvicts me to be a good priest, as I said. Oh, I've been working really hard during COVID. I've been putting up with a lot. I can take a step back. But then I see guys like Deacon Andrew, other people that see how much God has loved them and realize that God wants to love me that much too, so I can continue to strive to be the best priest I could be. And whatever occupation, whatever way of life that you are encountering, God wants to do the same for you, to live no longer for yourself, but for him who died, and for others for whom Christ has died. But we need to be reconvicted. And so I encourage you to take time during these summer months when there's a temptation to kind of take a step back and get kind of lukewarm in these hot summer months, and learn to be thankful. That is the first key to being reconvicted. Because if I'm thankful, I realize that I have good things that I don't really deserve, and I've been given them, so I become thankful, and then I'm renewed in my faith that there's someone who actually loves me and has given these things to me, and then I try to love him, who is God, and then trying to love the people around me as well. So it starts with thankfulness, and that's why we come to the Eucharist, which means thanksgiving. And you've come before God's altar to receive that love incarnate in the Eucharist, that love that compels us to live no longer for ourselves. Ask for the grace to be thankful, to realize how blessed you and I are, so that we may be renewed in our love for God, who already never ceases to love us, and we may strive to live no longer for ourselves. And that way we may remain in the love of God and convict others as well. Others who are struggling, who are afflicted, who are despairing, who need to be reconvicted. You are that conviction by the way you live. But first be convicted by the love of God here and now, so that we may remain in that love and draw other people to that love here and now and forever in heaven.